Yep.
Thanks, Vishwajit. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Udayendu, and I'm a customer leader at VMUG Pune. On behalf of VMUG Pune, I welcome you all to the 5th episode of vLeaderConnect. This time, we would like to gain insight into VMware's multi-cloud portfolio and what it offers, especially for application developers and platform engineers. So, in order to gain this insight, please join me in welcoming none other than William Lam, who will be sharing his views on this subject. Currently, William is working as a senior staff solution architect at VMware. He is one of the top blogger of V Community all the time and a tech evangelist with considerable fan base of 26,000 plus followers on Twitter, which is quite amazing. In order to help us driving this conversation, we have Jatin Purohit, who will moderate the session. I would also request all of you to keep asking your questions or keep posting your questions in our Q&A chat so that our VMUG community members will be help you to address with your questions. Now, without taking much time, let me hand it over to Jatin, who will take the proceedings from here on. Jatin, over to you.
Thank you there. Thanks everyone, and welcome William to VMUG Pune. How about we start with your career journey, and if you can quickly cover up how you have started and what exactly you do at VMware.
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks everybody. I think good evening to everybody. It's still early over in the Pacific Standard Time Zone, but really excited to be part here. So my name is William Lam. I'm a senior staff solutions architect as part of our VMware Cloud Solutions team within VMware. Our team is responsible for a number of our VMware Cloud services, including our marquee offering, which is our VMware Cloud on AWS solution. This also includes some of our other local cloud products and services like VMware Cloud on Outposts and VMware Cloud on Dell EMC. And in parallel, we're also managing and supporting and developing, the additional services, working closely with our hyperscaler partners like Azure, Google, and Oracle, and even our VCPV partners. In terms of a little bit about myself, I've been at VMware, man, this fall will be about 11 years at VMware, which is pretty crazy to think about. Just the other day, I just joined. And before, joining VMware, I was actually a customer of VMware, as probably many of you know, and kind of walked the VI admin shoes for a number of years, primarily a lot of large enterprises. And one of my first job, right out of college, joining and kind of getting started in my VMware journey was a task to sort of help the business understand, when VMs go down because of a hardware failure, and hardware still fails even in 2022, as we know, and how to help the organization understand the impact of those workloads. And at the time, this was kind of done by hand. We did have a custom CMDB that contained all the information about the different servers, virtual machines, the application, and the business owners. However, we did not have an automated way to determine when these workloads were down and then correlating that with the respective teams. And sometimes these applications might have kind of like a hierarchical approach. And so we need to kind of notify everybody under a given component or process, because this was a highly regulated healthcare space. There was certainly a lot of different types of processes that we had kind of to implement. And coming right out of college, obviously I did not get access to production, but one of the VMware administrators did provide me read-only access to vCenters, and we certainly had a number of them. And my first task was to kind of identify, how to go about doing this, right? And this was, before we had VMware APIs, before I was really doing any serious automation, but I had always been interested in kind of trying things out, exploring things. And so kind of the idea of playing around with things was always kind of interested in me and kind of tinkering and just learning. And at that time, the way that I kind of figured this out was, go and poke around the vCenter database. Now, obviously, as we know, many, many years later, that's not ideal. And we have different automation frameworks that allows you to retrieve the information that you need. But it was a really basic use case. And it's funny enough that that's still a very common use case that we even see even today. And it's still a common challenge. And I can certainly talk to some of the solutions that I've had a chance to work on to help, make this more easier. But at the time, when an ESXi would go down, vSphere HA would automatically restart those VMs. It did exactly what it needed to do. But because we had a whole sort of different types of applications, some of them are custom application, some of them because they've been around for anywhere from 10 to 20 years at that time, because this was a biotech company and we had to keep these around for regulation and compliance purposes. Sometimes they just would have issues, right? And so somebody would have to kind of go in and check. And so ultimately, what I ended up doing was writing a small Java application. This was kind of what I learned out of college, as a high-level language, and so it was kind of fresh in my mind. And so I kind of used Java to talk to various databases, our CMDB, and when a host goes down, we would detect that, and then identify all the workloads, find all the application owners and the system owners, right? Because oftentimes we also need support from the system owners, and basically sent an email. And this was really useful because what ended up happening was that, the team would be on an on-call rotation. And if you're unfortunately, that week that you're on call, we had an outage, you would spend a lot of your time waking up in the middle of the night, going in and creating this email, right, of all this thing. And now it was done automatically for you. So that was kind of my first foray into, automation, and certainly the path of going down, just looking at how to, dig into correlating between the business needs and different automation capabilities, and really starting to explore the VMware ecosystem. I did a lot of automation, standing up systems, so a lot of the Kickstart stuff. And so some of my early works in ESXi automation, you might see that in the VMware community forums, and even even at that time I wasn't blogging at the time yet. But I certainly shared a lot of that on the communities, and certainly a lot of that has been motivated by the work I do for my employer at the time. And over the years, I've joined various large organizations. The next large one that I want to share some details on is a very large SaaS vendor. They still exist today. Actually, one of the largest SaaS vendors out there. And my responsibility, along with our team, was to manage and run the VMware infrastructure for all of R&D. And so we had several hundred different customers, business units. And there, one of the things that was very clear to me, and what I learned there, was that not only is automation and scale important, but also, if you make a mistake, that can certainly create some large ripple effects, right? And so really being careful about testing and testing rigor. And because this was a SaaS platform, one of the things I came to learn is that, if you have one small defect, no matter how small it is, the implication is humongous, right? Every single customer of ours would be impacted. And so it really just brought a whole new lens of just focus and testing, and just understanding the implication. And again, continue doing a lot of my VMware automation. And at that time, I've kind of established a blog, still sharing a lot on the communities. And there's really a lot of that work and just kind of engaging with the community, right? Sharing what I've learned for my day-to-day, and also kind of seeing what are some of the challenges that our customers are seeing. And I always enjoy solving problems. And so putting together scripts or helping users understand how to consume the APIs. And over time, that became a much more natural thing for me to go in, especially as you start to use the product more and more and dive deep that way. And then, eventually, I'm sure many of you have known, I ended up joining VMware. And it was really Duncan Epping, who is one of the people who've kind of, convinced me to join VMware. And he's also been the sole responsibility for hiring a lot of the VMware rock stars that we have at the company, including folks like Alan Renouf, Frank Denneman, Cormac Hogan. And we were part of the technical marketing team at that time. And, part of the interest was really, how do we help our customers not only adopt automation, but just making our products improve and get that out there to a much broader audience. And so I felt like at that time that was a really interesting proposition. And so I kind of decided to take a leap and join VMware, and sort of, I've had a number of different roles within VMware, and my focus has always been helping our customers, bringing in feedback that I see, areas that we can improve upon. And that has been true for certainly our core vSphere platform, vSAN, NSX, and certainly most recently within our VMware Cloud set of services. So that's a little bit of history about myself.
That's really exciting, William, because if we look at this community, especially Pune VMUG, a lot of us come from the system admin background and especially the VI admin background. So whatever you speak on this forum totally makes sense. So thanks for being with us. The one thing that you haven't talked about is your blog. And I was just looking at some of the stats that you have shared on Twitter. Last year, you have posted around 100 plus blog posts, and then you had some thousands of views on each and every post. I think when we look at your blog post, it's basically a place to check each and every technology, each and every product and solution that VMware has to offer. So what makes you going and writing the blog post for our community member customers, and how do you approach that content creation part of it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of work. Don't get me wrong. I think you know, some false misconception is that, you know, I think as consumers of the content, and again, really appreciate all the support from the community and even some of our partners and all that, is that, you know, what you see is sort of the publication of the articles. You know, a lot of times people don't see sort of like how much work it takes, right? And at least for my own personal philosophy around these things is that I personally like to explore a lot of different technologies. As you've seen, if you kind of look on a weekly or monthly basis on some of the blog articles, you can probably guess what I'm working on. You know, I don't try to hide that. You know, there are some things I obviously cannot talk about, but if you look at the content that I focus on, you know, you can kind of figure out like what are the areas that I'm working with customers on, product and engineering, or just something interesting that just come up in conversation, you know, such as this, or customers call. I'm on them quite frequently. And so, so that's also helpful. But even before that, and even before joining VMware, you know, I personally have always enjoyed learning new things. You know, getting comfortable with things that I'm not familiar with. You know, obviously there are some things that I am more interested in. Networking is not my favorite topic, but you know, it is very critical to understand, especially in the cloud space, right? And so part of me wanting to kind of, you know, grow my own skill set is to learn some of these things, because at some point in time, these things will become relevant. You know, NSX in the early days was really just the software-defined networking layer. Very, very interesting. But what you see now is that it's a very integral part of our VMware Cloud solution. It's a very integral part on our Tanzu portfolio. It's a very integral part as we look at our telco platform. And the way that I tend to learn is not by reading it, is by getting hands-on. And so once I kind of figure out how to deploy or configure something, I don't want to go through that pain again. And so my mind immediately goes to like, you know, can I automate this? Part of that is to benefit myself personally. But as you've seen, it can also benefit the community, right? I am a believer that some of the initial learnings, especially setting up some of our technology, sometimes it can be complex and it can be interesting, but for many others, I think they will get a bigger benefit if they can actually consume something immediately after the fact. And so you don't have to figure out like, okay, how do I wire this up together so I can understand how NSX works and the benefits that it can give to your organization, or how to set up vSAN or set up vSphere. And so I tend to kind of, you know, put the passion of automation into kind of automating all these different componentry such that users can actually consume some of these things. And you see a lot of the labs that I produce, and it's used by lots and lots of folks out there, right? And it just helps you get to the thing that's more interesting. You know, if you're interested in Tanzu, you shouldn't be spending your time setting it up. You know, it's definitely a great exercise, and it's a great way to learn how the product works. And I do that for that reason as well, is that, you know, if you really understand it, you know, once you can kind of automate some of those aspects of it, because it really forces you to figure out, okay, how do these components work? How does the APIs work? You know, what are the dependencies? And so that's something I've just generally enjoy, and something that I've had to do in my past role as an administrator. Again, going back to that scaling aspect, right, is always kind of doing more with less. And it tends to be something that is expected of you know, the VI cloud admin folks, right? Is that, you know, you're always given these tasks, and I tend to look at what are some of the low hanging fruits. And so to me, installation, configuration, these to me are really low-hanging fruits, right? And although it does take some time to learn the automation aspects, and there's definitely plenty of tooling, especially in 2022 compared to 10 to 15 years ago, that you have at your disposal. And so I see that as a huge benefit that folks should definitely lean into, and there are different capabilities and techniques. And so really that aspect of just wanting to learn and the sharing aspect ends up being kind of my roadmap for the content that I end up producing. There are certainly some technologies that I'm interested in, I learn about, and I want to share with users, a lot of tips and tricks on how to better utilize the VMware platform ecosystem. But a lot of it is really motivated by customer discussions, stories. VMworld is a great place to kind of hear some of the challenges and also some of the interesting solutions. And so I tend to think about these things all the time. And so kind of going back to the content creation point of view, I almost at any given time, I have 4, 5, 6 different blog posts kind of in flight at all different stages of the life cycle. Some of it is just an idea. If I talk to somebody and I was like, oh, this sounds interesting, I might just write it down, on a OneNote and just start the research process, right? And as these progress, and some of them may make it into a final blog post, sometimes it may not. And eventually, it'll go through that process, and then you end up seeing an article like it's published. And so it feels like, oh, he just did that overnight. And some articles are done overnight, but a lot of them do take a lot more time. And I'm sure if you ask Duncan or anybody else, they can contest the same, right? It is a lot of effort on our end to make sure that can we communicate the details. And especially when you think about like automation, it can sometimes be a dense topic. And so making it easily consumable, and also I like to also add, tooling on top of that, right? Whether it's a PowerShell module, whether it's a script example, so that you can see something and you can, again, get immediate benefit from it, so that you as a consumer can then take that work that I've done and build upon it. And I've seen that time after time, that users have been able to build some really amazing things, both internally at VMware, but also externally as a customer. And so that to me is very satisfying and very motivating, and kind of keeps me going even to this date. So.
That's great. That's great. Let's quickly get into our today's topic, which is obviously the multi-cloud. William, you work as the customer zero role. You directly interact with the customer, and at times you behave and work like a customer and give the feedback to product as well. Based on your experience, how does today's current IT infrastructure looks like? That's one question. And obviously it is very clear that more and more enterprises are now distributing their applications across multiple cloud, multiple infrastructure. What are some of the key business drivers that are compelling customers to adopt this strategy?
Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, I mean, if you look back, 10, 20 years ago, a lot of customers, started in kind of like what we call kind of mono cloud, right? Single cloud. And what we've noticed in the past 5 to 6 years, that has certainly changed, right? As advancements in cloud services and technologies become more readily accessible, the availability of connectivity has really become a huge differentiator. And early on, you start to see some adoption of different clouds, based on kind of your needs and services. A good example is like Office 365 and productivity suites and tooling. Now, a couple of years ago, unfortunately, we got hit with the pandemic, and I'm kind of still in this pandemic mode. It sort of accelerated the needs of these cloud services, right? And certainly VMware has played a pivotal role in this, especially with the workspace and work from anywhere initiatives and some of the tooling. Technologies like Zoom, as an example, has not only allowed us to connect, as a community, halfway across the world, but it's also enabled so many other different use cases. For me personally, when the pandemic started, one of the biggest concern as a parent was, how was our kids going to get educated? And it's not exactly something that a parent wants to brag about, that their kids know how to operate Zoom. They know how to mute themselves, but these types of technology has really transformed the way that we interact, do business, and engage on a more personal level, especially with social media and everything that's been happening around us these days. And in terms of the landscape, what we've seen in the past couple of years is that this topic of multi-cloud, was debatable several years ago, but what we're really seeing, and this is really coming loud and clear from our customers, is that multi-cloud is real. Now, how you get there, certainly has a couple of form factors, right? Some of it is more of accidental. We see this happening certainly around mergers and acquisition as an outcome. In fact, we had a customer, they were just acquiring a company, and they were on one particular cloud vendor. They weren't looking at multi-cloud. And as they were acquiring this particular organization, they happened to be using a different cloud provider. And one of the mandates was to simplify and consolidate, their resources, which makes a lot of sense from an M&A point of view. And so one of the things that they needed to do was to basically consume that different cloud and start a workload migration. So as we see customers adopt multi-cloud, we also see sort of consolidation as well happening simultaneously. And so we kind of see sort of three different core buckets of kind of why multi-cloud. First and foremost, it's around, the application and data proximity. I already talked a little bit about kind of the M&A scenarios. We see, customers supply and applications where they need to have certain kind of data sovereignty. Sometimes it's more regional. Not all cloud providers are created equal, especially in terms of location. And so having that close proximity to your data becomes key. That proximity could be in an on-prem environment. It could be in a particular retail location. We've also spoken to some customers who are, their core business is in one particular region, but they want to be an international company. And historically, before cloud and public cloud was available, you needed to have physical presence in all the different locations. So imagine if you had an organization that was based out of EMEA, and they wanted to have presence in US. Well, historically, you needed to basically open up an office in the US, right? Hire folks there and physically have somebody there. Now you look at all the different things that we've been able to do with digital transformation and the beauty of the cloud. I don't need to have a physical presence there. I can have a cloud deployment and have my application and services, cater to that market in terms of latency and proximity and also services are available, but I can still be, my core business can be physically located elsewhere. So that's been something that's been coming up a lot. Third-party SaaS organization and kind of consumption. It's not just the public cloud providers, but it's also interconnecting with other managed service providers that provide more deeper connectivity, especially in the edge, which becomes a really interesting space where there's certainly a lot more places that you need to create that connectivity. The other piece of it is around, best fit for the application, right? Differentiated capabilities, like I mentioned earlier, not every cloud is equal. And even if you have common types of, storage, AI services, there may be certain clouds that do a better job than others. And so based on, your business requirements and application requirements, you may go down the path of needing these capabilities. And so you'll start to consume your services based on the needs of your application, right? No surprise there at all. And then again, easily access innovative capabilities that are provided by some of these providers. And then something that's been kind of coming up more recently is around kind of this idea of a composite application, right? Having your application consume kind of the best of breed of different services across these different cloud providers. We don't necessarily see, a single application being run on multiple clouds simultaneously. It's very possible that that does exist out there, but what we see more of is to be able to create these composite applications and having a mixture of both traditional workloads as well as some of these modern capability and services. In fact, there was a customer that, their backend database was a mainframe and will continue to be the case. And this needs to be running in an on-prem environment. And they were distributing their front-end application and breaking that component up into different pieces. And they want to take advantage of some of the cloud services. And then for them, that became a differentiation for the organization. And so when you look at multi-cloud and even just kind of how you think about your digital transformation and app modernization, it all goes back down to the application. What are you trying to do for your organization? What's going to make you differentiated? And then kind of look at how best to get there. And from a VMware point of view and our VMware Cloud story, I feel like we have, a really fantastic, strategy to help our customers, think about that, right? If you're looking to move to the public cloud and consume those services, we will help you get there through our VMware Cloud CrossCloud Services offering. And not just a single cloud, but also multiple clouds, right? And also for customers that need to have, infrastructure that continues to run in an on-prem environment, but they don't necessarily want to manage that on a day-to-day basis. So think about patching, upgrading your vSphere infrastructure. Log4j was a humongous impact. These are things that I believe that our customers don't enjoy doing. I certainly did not enjoy patching our hypervisor, with the constant set of patches and security vulnerability. But it's just the fact of the nature, right? And one of the benefits of our VMware Cloud solution is that it is a managed service, and you can have that managed offering, whether it's running in the on-prem environment as well as in the cloud. And we do see most customers being in kind of this hybrid mode of having mixed infrastructure. And this literally leads to a lot of flexibility and ultimately innovation at the space, because now you have a very flexible infrastructure layer that allows you to not think about patching the infrastructure, managing the infrastructure. You can start to think about the workloads. And this is where I feel like our customers have been able to really get creative and start to unlock the capabilities of the cloud, right? Is that they're not having to think about these day-to-day tasks that are very mundane for everybody, and start to think about, how do I take my traditional application? How do I modernize it? That makes sense. It may not be rewriting the application completely. It may be taking advantage of these different services, looking at, container-based workloads. And also on the topic of composite application, we also see a lot of diversification, also risk aversion around ensuring that, a particular cloud provider, outages does not affect the customer. It is true that, outages do happen, right? Just like I mentioned earlier, servers do go down and services do go down, and ensuring that you're planning for those types of eventualities. And one other note that I wanted to add was that I think it was either last year or the year before, we did a survey, and there's been a number of other industry surveys on the topic of multi-cloud. And so we're only going to see this trend increase, is that I think out of all the organizations we've kind of serviced, like over 75% of the customers today already use 2 or more public clouds. And about 40% of those customers are using actually 3 or more public clouds. So the reality is that, multi-cloud is certainly here to stay. And how does VMware and our VMware Cloud portfolio help our customers manage the technologies? And I was just actually thinking about this other day. When you look at servers in your typical data center, and this may not be true for everybody, but I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. We used to be all in on one particular vendor. And it gave us, a lot of flexibility in both CapEx and as OpEx, right? Is that, we manage it. And we purposely actually introduced another major hardware vendor into the ecosystem. And it wasn't anything around lock-in, because that tends to be a topic that a lot of people kind of tend to bring up. And it actually hasn't been coming up much in our customer conversation, interestingly enough. And a lot of it sometimes boil down to just cost and arbitrage, and we were looking at a couple of things, obviously getting the best pricing because we were buying in bulk, but we also wanted the vendors to really push the innovation boundaries. And because we were a SaaS organization, we needed to have the latest set of capabilities. And so we kind of saw this back and forth between different hardware vendors and even CPU vendors between Intel and AMD. And 1 year Intel might be doing really, really well and have certain capabilities, and AMD the next year did better. And so we actually used that as a strategy to not only get better pricing, but also making sure that we got the best innovation capabilities. And you would argue like, hey, 2 different hardware vendors, 2 different tooling. It made the operational piece of it certainly challenging, right? We certainly did a lot of automation around it, but what ended up helping us kind of manage that, and we ended up introducing other types of hardware vendors as well, because they provide different capabilities. They service, high performance computing better than others. And so we had these different things. And what ultimately helped us there was VMware vSphere. That became our consistent layer. And when I kind of look to multi-cloud, I see our VMware Cloud and our VMware Cloud CrossCloud Services as that layer to help us manage it and provide some level of consistency and operational awareness for our customers, so that although you have these different clouds, we try to provide you that common layer for operational purposes.
That's great. And just to add over here, because it is very important for our conversation, which we will be having on the application side. William, you have briefly touched upon some of the numbers, and especially you have talked about the application diversity. I think we have had a report by IDC, which basically says that in today's environment, we have around 400 plus applications which can be running in any enterprise, right? These applications are mostly monolithic at this point of time, which basically means that the virtual machines or bare metal based application, but at the same time we are seeing an increased workload on the containers and Kubernetes. And both of these virtual machine as well as these container based workload to not only work all together, but they also want them to integrate themselves in a fashion where it seems like a very seamless integration, right? We are doing something with VMware Tanzu, and especially I want you to put some highlight on Tanzu Mission Control, because what vCenter does for infrastructure, I believe the Tanzu Mission Control does for the applications which are distributed across multiple cloud. If you can quickly simplify what exactly Tanzu Mission Control is and how it is simplifying the overall operations when it comes to the cloud native application, then I guess it would be a great hint for our customers.
Yeah, if we took a step back, VMware Cloud, as you understand, is kind of our infrastructure IaaS layer that's consistent across the different clouds. This includes our AWS offering, but also our Azure, Google, and Oracle offering. When you take a step up and you look at a higher level, we also have these cross-cloud services that also operate in this multi-cloud world. An example of that would be like our vRealize cloud portfolio. I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with products like vRops, Log Insight, vRealize Automation, and we have cloud services of all these capabilities, and they're super easy to use, right? It's just literally a toggle of a button, and you now no longer have to worry about the management capabilities. And Tanzu Mission Control falls under that category around these cross-cloud services. And what's really exciting about Tanzu Mission Control, and I think that's a great analogy, is like if you think about vCenter as our control plane for our ESXi hosts, right? You wouldn't want to necessarily manage individual ESXi hosts. There's certainly a number of challenges, and also you get certain capabilities when you look at a management layer like vCenter. Our Tanzu Mission Control, which is our distributed cloud service for managing Kubernetes-based workloads, is exactly that, right? And so this allows you to manage all types of Kubernetes offerings. Certainly our VMware Tanzu TKG offering, which can run in your on-prem environments. This includes our vSphere with Tanzu integration solution. It also includes TKG running across our different cloud provider solutions, including VMware Cloud AWS and the Tanzu services. And what's really neat there is that this is really a platform that is really designed for our platform operators and even our developer consumption. And so we can actually attach any conformant Kubernetes cluster, and it gives you a couple of things. First, it gives you full visibility. Just like vCenter gives you visibility of the inventory of the different hosts, the different VMs, Tanzu Mission Control allows you to attach different Kubernetes clusters. And this also can include native cloud services. So this could include things like Amazon EKS, Azure AKS, and even GKE. And so these are really just any form factor of Kubernetes. And so we can actually mix and match. And so we do understand that customers do have a mixed set of environments, right? And obviously this brings a lot of different challenges. And so Tanzu Mission Control is out there to help really unify this and give platform operators the visibility into these different infrastructure, allow you to easily lifecycle these Kubernetes cluster, right? Unlike vSphere, the lifecycle and duration of Kubernetes, it's pretty fast paced if you think about it. Every quarter there's a new release. And so by the end of a calendar year, it's very possible that the version that you started out with, if you didn't patch it, you're completely out of support. It's unheard of. Like, I mean, I think vSphere is quite interesting that, we have, such a long period of support time. And you look at the cloud native world, because it's moving so fast, right? It's really difficult to keep up. And what we've learned from a lot of customers, that even if they're consuming some of the public cloud offerings, they have a hard time keeping up with the lifecycle management. And so Tanzu Mission Control not only gives you that visibility, but we make it very easy for you to basically understand the version and basically apply lifecycle management and kind of doing a rolling upgrade. We also give you visibility into the applications and the containers that's running underneath, and then allow you to set policies so that you can actually guide users in coming into a particular cluster, maybe in a particular namespace, which becomes kind of like a container of resourcing for your different teams. And so it really makes it more manageable. And so it really provides you this platform for management. And so it's definitely an exciting piece of technology. If you're a VMware Cloud and AWS customer specifically, not only do you get the Tanzu capabilities in terms of running Kubernetes workloads just out of the box, it's included as part of the service, so there's no additional charge, but it also includes Tanzu Mission Control accessibility. And so as a consumer of the cloud service, not only do you get flexible infrastructure, but you also get a modern platform to start to develop and transform your application. And then we give you this Tanzu Mission Control viewpoint, right? So that you have all the tools at your disposal, so that you as a cloud admin have the accessibility of the infrastructure, but you can also provide that to your end users. So Tanzu Mission Control can also be used to provide access for your developers to come in and say, hey, I'm allowed for this particular project. I can now start to deploy and start to run my workloads there. So a really, really powerful platform.
That's great. Before I move on to the next topic, which is obviously we will be discussing about hyperscale and some things around the infrastructure, let me take moment and appreciate Arup Simon. He is putting up a wonderful commentary in the chat box. So thank you, Arup, for doing that. And let me also see if there are any questions in the question and answer chat. Do we have any question that we can pick up at this moment? Or should we keep continuing?
I think we do have a question. It's not related to the topic that we are, but it's kind of interesting, you know. So the question is from Abukar Ahmed, and he asked that, you know, that hi Liam, I really love your Kickstart installation guidelines, and he uses them. So he wants to understand if he can deploy the whole cluster with vCenter and NSXT unattended with the Kickstart. So is it possible, William?
It's a very loaded question, I believe.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, and I'm glad you enjoyed the Kickstart automation topics. In fact, I recently referenced that internally. There's a project I can't really talk about, but they were actually using some of that. But what I will say is that actually the answer is yes. I haven't necessarily demonstrated it completely, but I do have a project out there called USB to SDDC project. And it basically builds on this topic. And the idea there was, and I did this for VMUG several years ago, I think at the Australian VMUG, and this was like a live demo. So I had like 1 hour to do the keynote, and I said, hey, I'll deploy, ESXi, vCenter, and vSAN, completely automated within that, under that 1 hour time frame. And luckily I was able to achieve that. And it leverages ESXi Kickstart. And if you look at that particular project, it shows you how to basically stand up vCenter and the techniques that I've used. And so the answer is yes, you can make it work. And there's a number of different ways of doing it. And so if you take a look at that particular project, you just Google USB to SDDC project. There's a GitHub repo, and there's several blog posts that talks about the different techniques. And again, these are the things that I've learned over the years as a customer and kind of playing around with ESXi and understanding all these different things together. You can then kind of connect the dots and deploy other solutions on top. And once vCenter is available, you can certainly start to automate a bunch of other products.
That's great. Thanks, William, for that. Before I touch upon on the hyperscaler solution that we have to offer, let me quickly share my experience during my time when I was doing the system administration. It was in 2015. I was working with a retail organization, and we actually had to migrate an entire data center physically from one location to another, just because the data center location which we had leased for, it was expiring, and we have to move to a location. It took us 48 hours to complete this physical location, and during that particular, we actually had to bring down the entire data center operation. Now, if I look back at that scenario, and now if I compare that to 2020-22, I guess we have the solutions where you can easily peer your site and easily migrate your workload using HCX. And part of that solution is obviously the hyperscaler solution that we are offering with multiple clouds of your choice. So William, how about if you can share some insight about what kind of solutions we have when it comes to the hyperscaler, and what are the primary use cases that customers are using for these hyperscaler solutions?
Yeah, definitely. So today we're kind of partnering with like kind of 4 key hyperscaler solutions. You're already familiar with our VMware Cloud AWS offering. This, I think this is our 5th year now, I believe, in operating the service, and it's just been fantastic to see our customers onboard. And in fact, the data center evac story, is really close to the business, because one of our very first customer that's onboarded, one of our largest customers, is Freddie Mac, and that was exactly their use case, was to do a data center evacuation. And move those workloads. And without technologies like HCX and this connectivity, it's nearly impossible. And for them, it was about moving away from just operating a traditional data center. They're in the financial industry, and so they kind of knew where they needed to spend their investments and saw IT as a partner in helping them with this innovation. And so they start to look at moving my capabilities into the cloud and not having to worry about that, right? So that's one of the key scenarios that we see out there. And we also see a lot of hybrid DR use cases that you mentioned earlier. We're starting to see around app development, especially in the Kubernetes aspect, because we recently launched that service on VMware Cloud AWS, and because it's part of the offering, it's simply a click of a button or an API call, and all of a sudden you can now deliver enterprise-grade Kubernetes runtime to your organization, whether dev, test, or even production workloads. Second to that, we also have an offering with Microsoft Azure. So this is our AVS solution, or Azure VMware solution. Again, this is a service that is run and operated by Microsoft. And so obviously they take our VMware SCDC solution, runs that as a managed service. And so this is run by Microsoft, and we certainly see a lot of great adoption there. And to contrast that with something like AWS, we're partnering up with AWS. It's a joint engineering effort. And so from the difference capability there, VMware is running that service, right? It's a managed service that we provide. You call VMware and we provide you all that set of services and support. We also have an offering with Google, our GCVE offering, so the Google VMware Cloud Engine offering. And again, similar to AVS, this is a service that is owned and operated by Google. And so for customers that want to run in that infrastructure, that's available to you. And then lastly, we also have an offering with Oracle, OCVS, or Oracle Cloud VMware Solution. Can't keep straight with all these different acronyms. And in fact, we even have more than that. Most recently, we talked about our Alibaba Cloud, that's currently in early access right now. And we also have a lot of partners in the our VCPP program, right? What we call kind of sovereign clouds, because again, different customers will have different locations, data sovereignty, and different requirements and verticals that they're trying to solve towards, right? And so really taking our core VMware CDC stack, we made it possible to run it in all these different cloud providers and to ultimately give customers that choice, right? We talked a little bit about the multi-cloud use cases and some of the reasons why you might choose one provider over the other, or why you might want to use two or more providers for that reason. And again, the use cases that we've talked about, data center evacuation, DR is a big one. Migration between clouds, we're starting to see that come up more and more recently, the M&A discussion that I mentioned earlier, but also flexibility, right? We have some customers that do need to think about things like risk aversion, compliances purposes and stuff. And for some customers, they need to have a strategy that if they need to exit a cloud, they need to be able to do it almost immediately and be able to have a backup solution to that, right? So these are things that are top of mind for a lot of our customers, and we continue to learn from them. And again, the adoption kind of continues. But yeah, we're having a lot of great success across these different providers. But it's not just the public cloud that we have these offerings on. Earlier on, you might have heard something called VMware Cloud on AWS Outpost. So this is VMware Cloud on AWS. But instead of running the public cloud, we do understand that some customers have certain types of requirements, whether it's the amount of data gravity that exists in the on-prem data center, or that there's regulations that just prevents them from completely taking in a public cloud service. We're able to provide you this managed offering. So this is hardware and software that runs in your on-prem data center. And this also includes our VMware Cloud Dell EMC offering as well. It falls under that category of local cloud. And the benefit there to a customer is that you've got the data that runs in your on-prem infrastructure, but it's managed as a cloud service, right? So you still get all the benefits of all these different VMware Cloud offerings, but it runs in your on-prem data center and it's able to talk to the workloads that you need to. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a customer that needs that connectivity to their mainframe. And for latency purposes, you may not want to basically go over the public internet, or if you have challenges around connectivity at your edge location, this becomes a great alternative while still getting the benefits of a managed service.
Yeah, that's great. And just for the information, very dedicated space, which the uc.techzone. Where you can find all the information about the hyperscaler that we have today. Moving on to William, it is not easy to adopt the multi-cloud strategy. That's for sure. There are certain challenges and consideration that customer might want to consider before they actually adopt these solutions. I know for the fact that you have co-authored a wonderful framework, which we call it as VMware Cloud Ready Framework. How about if you can quickly give you a glimpse what exactly this framework is and how can customers look at this framework and get some direction in terms of adopting the multi-cloud strategy?
Yeah, definitely. As we started our initial journey on VMware Cloud AWS, and we've been working with a lot of the large customers like the Freddie Macs of the world, we came to find a lot of different learnings, right? Especially as these early customers were coming in. And ultimately what we found, like you said earlier, is that, it can be very challenging and even daunting to think about, how do I manage and operate a single cloud, yet more than one cloud? What are the strategies on moving my workloads, and what are some of the pain points that we saw? And so in these early years of the VMware Cloud Service, we came to have all these different learnings from our customers, and we wanted to, put this together and figure out, like, is there something that we can help our customers with, right? And continue sharing these learnings. And so we kind of came up with this new framework called the VMware Cloud Ready Framework that really helps customers understand and accelerate their journey into the cloud, whether it's single or multiple clouds. And this framework is something that you can find on our TechZone site. So if you go to vmc.techzone.vmware.com, we've been working on this with folks like Imad Yunus on our team. And the idea here is to really help you understand, what are the different things that you need to think about, as you start this journey to your cloud, whether it's DR, whether it's data center evac, hybrid, or even app modernization, and then really provide specific guiding, architecture and design and best practices, right? So that customers can quickly accelerate their journey and start to achieve, the benefits that we've kind of talked about. And the way that the framework is broken up is that we have our core VMware Cloud Ready Framework pillars that really talks about these areas of focus, right? Whether it's around the planning, which is a big key part of it, is understanding the different types of workloads, making sure you understand the different dependencies, and how you think about moving some of those workloads or even transforming some of those workloads using modern capabilities, to how do you think about security, the actual migration of the workloads, and then ultimately the operation aspects of it. And for each of these different hyperscalers that I talked about, we want to provide specific guidance, and we do this in partnership with each of the hyperscalers and their solutions architect to give you the best set of best practices, things like network connectivity. As I mentioned earlier, networking is a huge requirement, and if you don't get it right, you're not going to have a great experience, right? And all the different providers have different types of connectivity, different considerations that you need to think about, whether you're doing a DC evac, right? You want to have high latency, high bandwidth, low latency, but in scenarios where you're trying to do hybrid, you're going to have other types of requirements. And so just helping you think about those things. And we have something called these journey maps. And the idea here is that, you can specify the use cases that you're interested in, and we will have content and collateral as well as educational material to help you understand how to achieve that particular outcome for a particular cloud. And so when you go through TechZone, you can say, hey, I'm a VMware Cloud AWS customer. I can then navigate to that part of the portal, and I can see all the different content that's relevant to that particular service, right? So that you can actually accelerate your journey. And we're also looking at things like automation and also working with our VCF counterparts. And so you'll start to see a lot more content in that space. And ultimately, our grand vision is to incorporate this VMware Cloud Ready framework directly into our service so that all these learnings and best practices are simply out of the box. We understand the infrastructure that you have both in your on-prem as well as your cloud and start to guide you there, right? And so today, it's some really great material. It's available for anybody. So you don't need to be a customer to basically start to take a look at that. And I highly recommend folks check out the VMware Cloud Ready framework white paper to get an understanding of the high-level framework. But also you can start to learn about the different services and some of the things that you need to think about as you think about how you want to approach your cloud strategy within your own organization, whether it's a local cloud solution or one of our public cloud offerings and all that.
That's great. I think we have 10 minutes left, and I just have one last question, and then probably we can wrap up the session. So when I look at the last decade, especially from the system administrator perspective, I think we all have got benefited from skills like PowerShell, Python, some of the skill set in the core data center technologies. Now, if you look at this particular decade and the years to come, what are the key skill set that you feel will help system administrator to propagate their career, especially when we look at the multi-cloud, public cloud space in the IT infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's definitely a number of different skills that I would consider. I think the first and foremost one is really, continue leaning into automation. I can't stress that enough, right? Being able to not only do more with less resourcing, which is, continues to be a concern, but it's also a scaling factor, right? And it's really, really important when you start to look at cloud consumption. And one of the things that I saw from our customers is that the customers who started, consuming cloud services early on, this was something that was just kind of built into their DNA. Like you could not operate with that scale in mind, especially for some of these services that are treated as more ephemeral. They kind of come and go. And so what we saw from those customers, which was really interesting, was that they quickly came to learn about, desired state platforms, using tooling like CloudFormation, Terraform, and Ansible to really have this declarative infrastructure, right? And then capturing all of this in configuration, using code, and less of the imperative. Like, we still see a lot of users doing imperative automation, similar like Power CLI as an example. But we saw that as a key skill set, right? Because it allowed them to quickly scale up and scale down and even move different services. And it still is true today. Now, longer term, this declarative infrastructure, it gets pretty interesting because there's a whole set of evolutions that's happening in this space, especially as it pertains to Kubernetes. Maybe we'll have a discussion on that topic next time. But
Yes.
Definitely continue automation. Now, in addition to that, also look about how you operate at scale. And when I look at a lot of our customers today, they are still spending a lot of their time managing the infrastructure. You need to do it. You look at the security vulnerabilities, it can be quite impactful, right? And being able to keep up with that. But it is something that is very difficult to do. And it's not that interesting ultimately, right? And so from that point of view, start to look at, managed services, ways that you can remove that set of requirements that you need to do and start to work on higher level capabilities for your platform. And so something like VMware Cloud as an example, just by simply adopting the public cloud offering, you can then take away the really mundane task of patching your infrastructure. That's done for you automatically. Because of the current supply chain issues, even adding capacity, even right now in this year, which is supposed to get better, it's still really difficult. It's anywhere from 4 weeks to maybe several months to get a brand new server, right? And it's even more costly if you have to think about storage. And in something like a VMware Cloud and AWS, it's literally an API call, and in under 5 minutes time, you now have a brand new host. That really transformed what you can do as an organization, how you can take on brand new projects. And so, I've been in cases where projects just come down the pipeline, right? A new project is kicked off. You don't know if it's going to be successful or not, but you need capacity and support. And it's really difficult to do that in the typical model that we've been doing for the past 20 years. And so from a skill set standpoint, is to start to lean into cloud services, look at where it makes sense to augment it, and look at the low-hanging fruits. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a number of vRealize services, and it can be a challenge of just deploying that stack and then realizing the value. And so if you look at something like vRealize Cloud Universal, it gives you access to all these different cloud technologies like VROps, and all you're deploying is a very simple collector, and automatically that information is now immediately visible in a cloud service, and you now get broad visibility, not in just one vSphere infrastructure, but multiple of those environments. And now you can start to really gain some insights and start to really move the business forward. And so really leaning into these cross-cloud services and seeing where it makes the most sense, and basically start to get experience with it, because I think that's really going to be the next model for the next, decade plus, within our industry as a whole.
That's great. William, I think in the interest of time, let me quickly check if we have any questions in the question and answer chat, and then probably we can quickly wrap the session. Do we have any question in the chat?
Yes, I have one question from Chandrasekhar B. So he wanted to ask, how you achieved the VCF automated deployment, because he was actually looking out at the blog and the article, and he can't see the IP VLAN configuration for the deployment. So he just want to understand if that need a 7 dedicated VLAN, or that can be done without a lesser VLANs also.
I think let me simplify the question, I guess.
Yeah.
The question is around how can you do the nested VCF deployment? And William, I know for the show that you have a very dedicated space for home lab related blog posts, so folks can certainly check out that. But I guess the question is, how can you easily deploy the nested VCF lab for the learning purpose?
Yeah, it's been some time since I worked on that article. Sometimes that's the kind of thing I did. I think for that particular setup, I think the prerequisite is that you would need to have the different types of networks available in advance. And so you would need to set up your physical infrastructure to have those required VLANs. And then the deployment script will basically consume those different networks and set that up for you. So if you don't have that already, obviously you need to set that up. And there are definitely a number of different ways, from using something as simple as like VOS or some type of a virtual router to give you those networkings. And then in more ideal state, obviously you have like a physical switch or a virtual switch that gives you access to multiple VLANs, but that is a prerequisite. It's not part of the automation, if I remember correctly.
Thank you. Thank you, William.
That's fine. I think that's it for today's discussion. Thank you, William, for having you on this particular call. Before we close this particular call, let me share with everyone that I will be sharing some of the links in the community forum. And this is not the end over here. We will continue our discussion on the multi-cloud with the different speakers, and probably in the next course of action, we will have somebody to talk about some of these hyperscaler in the deep dive. So we'll have those technicals in future. That's it from my side. Over to you, Biswajit and Uday.
Thank you, Jatin, and William Lam. A very special thank from VMUG Pune. We appreciate your time today, and it has been great experience knowing your journey and an insight into the multi-cloud. And top of that, your advice to advance how we can advance our career and with ever-changing technologies, it's really helpful. I think today a lot of community members from our community is inspired by your session today. And there's a lot of learning from today's session. And I'd like to thank you for this presentation. And yeah, this video will be shared very soon on our platform. And we'd like to hear the feedback about this particular episode today. Like our previous episode, we did get a lot of feedback, and that really helped us to shape our vLeaderConnect program, because your feedback is really helpful all the time. And yeah, and then we will like to hear the feedback from Twitter or LinkedIn, or you can share your feedback in our WhatsApp channel too. So thank everyone. Thanks for your time today. Have a nice evening and have a nice day to William.
See you guys. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
William, just for the last time, if somebody wants to reach out to you, how can they reach out to you? What's your Twitter handle, and what are some of the places where they can send the queries related to different stuffs which people are working on?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at LamW, or you can just reach out to me on my blog. I'm pretty active on Twitter, and so generally that's the easiest place to reach out if you have any questions.
That's great. Thanks, William. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good evening.
William, bye guys, take care.
Bye.
Everyone.